When I was going through my own therapy, which I've done consistently for years, and I remember starting to really feel those things loosen and change in me. And then I started to notice some people have never done therapy before. Some people have done it a gazillion times.
Relatable in the sense of not knowing how to talk about emotions or even like first person experience, really.
But when I did find yoga, something in my body and soul really resonated with that practice. I'm continuing to learn how my body works, how the technology works, and therefore cultivating some of the practices and things that I do value. I desire to be physically active and to engage my body in healthy and challenging ways. I desire to be mindfully, and oftentimes I'm reading too many things at the same time.
Welcome to the Willpower Podcast. All right, Mikey. So you blend therapy, music, and yoga. Can you tell me about a transformative experience from like one of these disciplines that has profoundly affected you?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is the therapy world. And that may be just because that's the thing that takes most of my time. But when I was going through my own therapy, which I've done consistently for years and years and years, but years ago when I was going through some of the more difficult things I had faced in my life and was processing them and trying to get healing from them in therapy, I remember I would do these like sometimes 2+ hour sessions focused around trauma healing and things like that. And those took a lot of energy and a lot of work. But I remember during that time, certain things that I didn't realize were holding me back, or certain things that I didn't realize had gotten into my system as much as they had. I think I knew it on paper, but seeing it on the outside wasn't maybe as obvious. And I remember starting to really feel those things loosen and change in me. And then I started to notice that gave me energy in life and different perspective and understanding to not only continue to do my own work, but also take risks and jump into other things that I felt like mattered to me. So that profound experience is maybe less of like a one spark of a moment kind of thing, but just a season
Right.
where by engaging in my own trauma healing, that really did something for me on a very noticeable level for myself.
Yeah. Can we talk about that just entire journey of therapy? Like walk us through
Mm-hmm.
what that even looked like for you. Did you like find a
Yeah.
therapist and then you were healed or like what? Yeah. What was that all
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. So I grew up in the South. I grew up in Georgia, and then I spent a good time in Nashville, Tennessee. And so for me growing up, I didn't even know what therapy was. The kind of cultural conditioning and ideologies that were core to the systems and communities that I grew up in was very much like, if you have issues, you take it to God or to the church, or you pray about it or something like that, and then maybe things will get better. So I, which is funny to think about because it's like, as a therapist, I didn't even know that was a thing until I got to college. Pretty much, there were some pretty nasty things that happened in my family system when I was in high school. And so that kind of opened me up to talking to like the first therapist I ever did. But it was confusing. I didn't really know what it was. The person wasn't all that helpful, and it just didn't even do anything. But then when I got to college and the things in my family and world were still just as chaotic and stressful, I took opportunities to meet with like the counselor on staff at the school. And that didn't really go well. It's like I had these early experiences of my therapeutic journey starting in my late teens, early 20s up until now. And I'm almost 40 now. And I've been going to therapy, in and out in different degrees since then. But I didn't start off knowing anything about therapy and even having a significant experience about it that I could make sense of. But I did have a lot of questions about what helps people. I did have a lot of internal feelings of like wanting to have an impact on the world, wanting to really do something that truly shifted what was happening for the people I knew, the people I worked with, things like that. And so, by happenstance, in some ways, not because I had a great therapy experience from someone, but just because I'm sort of a seeker and I'm always looking for insights and knowledge and blah, blah, blah. And that led me to investing in certain things and having different opportunities. And then eventually that led me to pursuing a master's degree in clinical mental health, which about 15 years ago now. And ever since I got that master's degree, I've been functioning in private practice.
And how did you know for yourself when you had at least like obviously like self-work is kind of a never-ending journey, but how did you know when you had some traction that like things were going in the right direction? Because you talked about the early counseling not feeling
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, I think what started to make sense to me, or when things started to feel like they had traction, is when some of the when I got the ability through therapy and other personal work things to actually put things into words that I could elaborate on, express, work through with another person. And so that even, I work with a lot of people across the spectrum of like where they're at in their journey. Some people have never done therapy before, some people have done it a gazillion times, so I have all kinds of different experience of clients coming to me. But with those early clients that I usually get, I notice a similar thing where it's like they don't even know where to start. They maybe thought about therapy 10 years ago, but it didn't really make sense and it was expensive and da 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 da. And I noticed that with those early clients, a big part of the work that we do is just finding language, learning how to name things, learning how to bring things forward, learning how to express things, learning how to like let it out, and just kind of lay all the chips on the table, pull all the puzzle pieces out. And that's really kind of what I think in my own journey started to help things get traction, was being able to say, oh, this was that, or that was this, or these things mean this. And then being able to self reflect, apply that, explore other avenues of healing or personal work or whatever, and just watch that kind of like sort of like mastery start to take place.
Yeah, you mentioned your upbringing, like growing up in the South, not having the idea of therapy even exist. And
Hmm.
I'm from Minnesota, but definitely a relatable in the sense of not knowing how to talk about emotions or even like first
Hmm.
person experience, really. So that step can be huge. It's just like
Hmm.
now I can at least talk about it. Now I know how to like describe what it is that's going on here. Whereas
Hmm.
before, like you're just going through shit and like you never actually have like the ability to express to someone else, this is what I'm going through. Can you walk me through like how you would start with someone? How do you like even come at that situation where they have no concept of expressing those things?
Yeah, I mean, hypothetically speaking, if say I'm getting a new client and they've never done therapy before, I want to understand where they're coming from and what they're wanting. I see therapy as a process of initiation, not necessarily as a process of support. Now, obviously, support comes through that, because we're building a human relationship that has substance to it. But I really see therapy as an initiatory process, which means that the person coming in the door, whether that be a real door or imaginary door to enter into the space of a process with me through coaching or through therapy or whatever, is that they're coming in one way and they want to leave another way. And so a lot of the things that I start with people is trying to understand where they came from, where they're at, where they want to go, what things they understand about their own mind, their own body, their own heart, and their own soul, and begin to find a way to weave all those things together for them that makes sense to them based off of, again, what they're wrestling with or wanting to accomplish. And then finding ways from, different therapeutic perspectives or modalities or whatever to piece it together and make it make sense. I think a lot of people, we have a world where therapeutic language has become a lot more common, and people use words that are kind of diagnostic in some ways as just normal kind of terms now, which is really bizarre, because I definitely didn't grow up with that or even have that in my young adult life. But it seems to be now that you can see people talking about like, oh, well, that person's such a narcissist, or oh, I'm dealing with this, da 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 da, or even somebody might say something that like Carl Jung quoted, and you're like, it's so strange that there's all this language around. But the thing that I notice is even though there's language, there's not a deep understanding of what it actually means and why it means something and what you do with that as a person. And so that's again another big piece of the initiating process of this is really getting our bearings, understanding, learning, and then application. So a lot of my clients, all of them, whether they're brand new or older, I give a ton of homework because I see that again, I see the therapy process as this initiatory process, and I see my job in that as a means to challenge, to encourage, to push, to educate, to support the person in what they're doing. And so the homework piece of it really serves to create a new pattern of being and also infuse someone with a lot of really powerful knowledge and insight that then we can turn into a lived experience, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, there's so much behind the words. I've had that happen multiple times where I like experience something and I'm trying to find the words for it, and then I'm like, oh, it's that thing. Like that thing
Mm-hmm.
I've always known. And I don't have a good example for that, but yeah, it's this where you come to and you're like, okay, that thing I've been reading or that thing I've been talking about that I didn't really like feel beneath the surface, that's what I just experienced. Like that's that
Mm-hmm.
thing. Because yeah, there can be a big disconnect. I know I've had that in the past where there's a big disconnect between talking about something and then actually experiencing it when you're, in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Let's jump over to music and yoga. So tell me about your history with them and how they play into your life now.
Yeah, so I'll start with yoga. In my personal journey, like I said, I did this therapy thing I've done it for a while. And then I was also doing other, self-help and wellness types of things. And yoga was one of those things that really took a front and center place in my life. I think in life we have these experiences when we find something and we're like, oh, this is my thing. Maybe for someone it's snowboarding. They go snowboarding for the first time and they're like, oh my God, like this hits all the things and I'm firing on all cylinders. And I grew up doing all kinds of activities and I still do lots of activities and have been invested in lots of different things. But when I did find yoga, something in my body and soul really resonated with that practice. And again, I was also engaging in it for the first time, really ever in my early 20s as I was going through a pretty significant healing process. And so, the combination of the mindfulness, the breath work, the physical movement, which is really crucial for me as a person, as well as kind of the subtle at times and even sometimes overt at times spiritual overtones that come with different practices of yoga. It really was like finding a missing piece of something in my life. And then the more I've dove into that world and the more that I've invested in it, or I've shown up in the yoga community as a whole, the more I just continue to see that it's such a powerful thing. So, I started just doing yoga as a thing for myself to support me through, a healing process. Then I invested in yoga teacher trainings and further education. And, a few years back, actually probably a while now, pre-COVID, I got what's called a 500-hour yoga teacher certification, which is kind of one of the big ones for anyone who's serious about teaching and educating and the practice of yoga, whether it be in like a physical form or whether it be in a academic sense. And one of the things that I've focused on in that process of certification and education was yoga philosophy and yoga psychology, and that integrates into my work really well. And it's also another piece that I engage with often. There's an organization I work with that has a publication that I contribute to regularly, presenting this amalgamation of psychology and yoga and, self-reflection and these different branches of the yogic system. And so that has been a huge part of my life. And it's something that, when it maybe fades out a little bit, I'm very much aware that, oh yeah, this is one of those things I want to get back. Yeah, does that answer those questions?
Yeah, can we dig into that a little more? I would love to
Sure.
hear about yoga outside of the physical, just because I've done yoga not a ton, maybe like 20 times in my life,
Yeah.
like a yoga class, but
Mhm.
I've never learned really anything about it outside of that.
Yeah. So for most people who've had any kind of education in yoga, one of the early things you learn is that there's kind of like an eightfold path that is what we call yoga as a whole, meaning that there are eight branches of sorts of this evolving process that we call yoga. And physical practice, asana is the word for it, is just one of those branches. There are many more that are focused on many different things from ethics, morality, breath work, physical practice, meditation, service to the world, self-study, dedication to like a higher power or something more than yourself. All of those are the core tenets that make yoga what it is. And the physical practice, as you see, as you drive by any strip mall or hop on Instagram and see people doing things, that from a Western perspective has been very emphasized, I think, because of how yoga was brought into the West and how the physical practices do benefit people so well on such a deep level. And I think it has a potential to do that so well because it's designed a certain way. But again, the asana, the physical practice, is just one of those many facets that make the whole system work. And a lot of times, if you were to read more into this, you might see that some of the more, what's the word I would use? More significant people, teachers in the yoga world will often communicate that the reason why you do the physical practice is so that you can do the others, primarily so that you can do the meditation type of work that informs how you are in the world and how you are with yourself. And so, in the whole system, again, the physical practice is meant to be just one piece of an ever evolving, ever growing reality that is your own human experience, as well as the community and everything else in between. And so, when it does come to me showing up in the world in different ways, I make it a point to lean into those different branches of the yoga tree and help that also be something that comes into the physical practice. A lot of times, like you said, you might go to a yoga class and it's very fitness oriented. Maybe they breathe a little bit. Maybe the teacher says something that's just mindful or gives you something to contemplate throughout the class or the practice, and then you kind of go on your way. But I really do try to set the frame in the things I offer to have a much more robust reality behind them. And then, there's all kinds of cool ways that yoga teachers, myself included, can work with designing or structuring a certain physical class or a breath work or pranayama class to like get at different things to help people heal and grow and expand themselves.
How has that your journey as a yoga instructor? Well, first, just doing yoga yourself, becoming an
Mhm.
instructor, how does that play a role in your therapy?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things is the somatic reality to it. And somatic is just a therapeutic way of saying the body, the soma, and the process that is enveloped in all of this that includes your body. So, traditionally speaking, most therapy, generally accepted therapy practices are very focused on your cognition. Like, what are you thinking? How does this affect you? What does this lead to? How's your mindset? That kind of stuff. It's very kind of here in your head. But one of the things that's been really powerful about having the yoga context is, well, this tradition's been around for thousands of years, and it has put a high emphasis on what the body is doing, what the body has carried, what your body is struggling with and needs support around. You can go on for days and days about what that means and how that is expanded upon in the yoga system. But in the therapy world, over the past 20 years, especially the past 10 years, the somatic practices have really blown up, meaning that people will enter into therapy with a somatic therapist like myself, understanding or knowing that the reality of what's happened in their body and what their body is coping with or struggling with or dealing with is also deeply intertwined into the psychological or cognitive process. And so in my work as a therapist, I really do bring forward not only the philosophies and the options and the facets of yoga, because I think the orientation that's there is really helpful for the Western mind, but also bringing in this reality that these meditative mindful practices, these breath work practices, these physical movements and expressions and everything else in between all are a part of what makes you who you are and contributes to why something may or may not be going well in your life. And again, the piece there is that the yoga provides a foundational perspective and reality to camp in, but it also provides a somatic orientation that invites in a different layer of processing for someone who say they're working with me in coaching or they're working with me in therapy, it's a whole different angle at how to recognize why and how things are functioning the way they are for you. So it opens up a lot of good doors for healing.
Okay. Are there any habits or mindsets that you have not been able to work through up until now or that you are still working on?
For myself, I don't think so. I mean, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm kind of a seeker by nature, which means that as hardcore as I might be into one belief or idea or ideology or mindset or whatever, I'm always curious what else is there and what else helps and what else has value and what else opens up other doors. And so, even though, like I mentioned briefly, I grew up in a cultural and religious context that was pretty rigid and closed off, that never, fully restricted me and limited me. I definitely at times, because if you grow up in the South or maybe even the Midwest, like you talked about, there's communities there, there's family systems there, there's friends there, and whenever you don't fall in line with the group, that can create tension or even loss and pain. But for me, with the way I'm wired, I definitely felt that strain, especially when I was in high school and college. Like I was pushing those edges as much as I could. And even until my young adult life, I was still pushing those edges and running up against things that didn't quite make sense on a heart level and on a soul level. But it was all I knew. But even those things I blew past and shook off and was able to keep staying the course in regards to my own wholeness and what I could bring to other people through my work and how I show up. And I guess in that regard, there's not anything that catches my mind about any mindset or something that has gotten in the way. But interestingly enough, one of the things I focus on in my practice through the people I serve is on healing what we would call like psychological wounds, core wounds. And oftentimes, core wounds come with a sort of like message or a certain kind of like phraseology that we run about in our head. For example, a lot of people struggle with not feeling like they're enough. A lot of people struggle with like not feeling like they have anything to offer or that they're good enough or that the things that really matter to them are important or valuable. So everyone has these like core wounds of enoughness, of identity, of worth, of value. And those things get really deep into who we are as humans. So they get really deep into our psychological structure, our bodies, our minds. And even though that may not be like a mindset or a specific belief, it's something that we carry. And I've found that as I've entered into my own healing journey, breaking my ties with those beliefs or those messages or those wounds has been something that's completely and radically enabled me to show up fully in ways that I never maybe would have been able to if those wounds or beliefs were still kind of under the surface at the foundation, kind of setting the tone for everything that would be built on top of that. And that's something in my own personal work that I'm always aware of is like, oh, I have these core wounds. This is the nature of how they came to life. This is the nature of how they were sustained and reinforced through experience and hardship, heartbreak and hardship and all these other things. And these are the ways that they show up in my daily life. These are the ways in which they inform how I see myself in the world. How do I continue to work at those deeper woundings to help cure them, care for them, carry them well so that they don't unconsciously run my life? And I feel like I'm just stuck in some weird loop. So while mindsets per se, I don't feel like I've ever gotten too stuck on anything. I definitely can see how this other component from the psychological world is a very big thing that I've considered and I help a lot of people with that if you don't consider it, it will block you in so many ways. And you may not even be aware of it.
Yeah, that's very true. It's like almost like you're missing out on certain things just because of this background thing that you're completely
Mhm.
unaware of. Okay, let's talk about relationships, and specifically, I would like to know about single on purpose. What is it,
Oh
and
yeah.
what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. So Single on Purpose was a book my friend John Kim wrote. And Single on Purpose is a book about how to kind of like rebuild yourself post loss of relationship, or how to invest in yourself in the experience of sorts of not having a intimate relationship, life partner, a spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. And he wrote that book as a kind of expression and a desire to like give insights and tools to people who, were going through this, like, how do I love myself? How do I get to know myself? How do I become the person I want to be through the lens of relationship? And so with that book, there's a online community that I'm a part of other coaches and therapists and people where we host group meetings, individual work, retreats, all kinds of different offerings to help people really find their way through what it means to be themselves. And so the Single on Purpose is a really cool, unique little community that is just really potent and filled with powerful insights, questions, support, resources that can really help someone heal from a breakup, can help someone redefine who they know themselves to be. And I'm a part of that because I really believe in that process of wholeness that we can go through if we can, say in this case, say you go through a big breakup or you lose something or someone and it really rocks you. Well, that's a really potent place to be. There's a lot of opportunity in that space to ask questions about patterns, cycles, impulses, default modes of being, conditioning, all these words that we use in the therapy world to try and understand how things happen. And if you can harness that energy and you can show up and take those big changes in your life seriously, there's so many cool things that can happen. And so that piece is just one avenue of how I show up in the world. And then you'd mentioned something about other relationships and things like that.
Yeah, let's talk about the flip side. So,
Mhm.
like you mentioned, like going through these like losses and loneliness and going from being in a relationship to not, or just not being in a relationship at all, can be a great place to find growth and see opportunities and notice things come up. What about the other side? So this is kind of my situation. I'm in a relationship
Mhm.
and I've been with my girlfriend for almost a year now. But I have definitely noticed that my inclinations towards like self-work have gone down being in the relationship, just because like things are easier. Like if I have a night where I don't have anything scheduled, like I have someone to hang out with every time. I have
Mhm.
yeah, it's I think things are just easier. I like feel a little bit better about myself, more confidence, and yeah, it just stops certain things from coming up that would. So what would you say to people like me who are in this situation of like things are good, but I also know there are still things beneath the surface? How do I dig those up?
Yeah, totally. I was leading a group in the Single on Purpose portal or online community this week, and someone presented a kind of interesting question, similar in some ways to what you're saying. And where the conversation started to go was just recognizing that we're all wired for love. We're all wired for connection. It is such a deeply ingrained thing into who we are and what our experience is as being humans on this planet. And so, I think there's a drive for all of us to find that sort of love or that connection that in the back of our hearts we know should exist or might be there, but we're maybe not quite sure how it is. And so I think a lot of our unconscious energy goes into trying to find that quote unquote relationship or that person so that we can have that ache abated or soothed a little bit. But I don't think soul oriented place, I don't think that ache is ever meant to go away. But I think because of how hard it is for us to be human, we like to attach things to people and things in order to make sense of ourselves and the world around us. And what ends up happening in that is, we might fall into a relationship or get the one we wanted or find the person we want to be with the rest of our life. And something in our psyche says, okay, this is going to help. This is going to change things. Now you can finally take a breath, which there is a beauty and a relief that comes to finding a healing and a beautiful relationship. There's no doubt about that. However, relationships, as far as I see them, aren't meant to simply serve the purpose of relief and safety. They're actually more so meant to serve the purpose of transformation and self actualization. But because of how we're wired, again, we're wired for love. We have these biological, psychological systems. There's what's called your attachment system, your nervous system. And these things are constantly getting activated and pushed and pulled on throughout the things you go through in life. And because there is that longing for connection and relationship, there's that ache for something more and something intimate and deep. When we do, again, attach that longing or that feeling onto a person, when a person comes through and kind of fills a few of the boxes of what we feel like that might be, well, then something in us just kind of pulls back and says, okay, I don't have to work so hard anymore. And that's where actually a lot of relationships start to struggle, is when projection onto the relationship of our needs goes kind of assumed or expected, and we're not putting in effort and energy from a self-started, other oriented kind of place, well, then things creep in, things get boring, things get dull. You take you take advantage or take someone for granted because you're just assuming things. And so for someone who is in a relationship, but might be starting to recognize, well, hey, maybe I should keep doing some work on myself, but it doesn't feel as urgent because I have a relationship and there's some comfort there. I think the thing that I often challenge my clients on is it's like, well, so many of us go out into the relational world looking for something that we want or someone that meets certain criteria for us. Rarely do we ever look at ourselves and go into the world and say, hey, who do I want to be? And how do I want to show up in the world for another person, so much so that they might be able to become their highest self? And so those questions, who do I want to be for this person? How do I want to show up, enable, and hopefully empower my partner to transform who they have been and who they can be? Well, then that starts to change what you allow to happen in your relationship, because you recognize that just letting certain things be or ignoring certain things or not putting as much energy into this, that, or the other is not serving you or them. And so in some part of that, the single on purpose kind of idea is really powerful, because whether you're single or not, the reality is that you probably don't know who you are all that well. And there's probably a lot more that you could get to learn about yourself and why you are the way you are and why certain things impact you the way that they do, that would help your life across the board. And a lot of that does require intention and effort and perspective. And again, if you are in relationship and not single, taking some of these ideas of like, well, what does it mean for you to really be the best version of yourself and really show up in the world in a compassionate and bold way? Well, you can answer questions around that for a long time. And I think that's really worth pursuing.
Yeah, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the identity of the relationship. I know that for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
And keeping myself as its own thing. And then, yeah, considering these types of questions like you're bringing up about who I want to be. That's huge.
Yeah. And then the context relationship, I think it's really helpful to learn some things about your partner and about yourself, so that when you ask that question of who do I want to be, it actually becomes a question that is in service of your highest good and the highest good of your partner or
Mm,
spouse. If you just say, who do I want to be? And you try to force that into a relationship, well, maybe it applies, maybe it doesn't. But asking yourself, like, based off of like for example, from my life, my wife is a certain kind of person with a certain kind of history and a certain desire and hope for her life and the world and what she can experience. If I take that into consideration, say, okay, this is who I know her to be, who she is striving to be, and this is how I want to show up. Well, how do I want to show up with that? And in that, and how do I want to consider those things in such a way that the general hope and drive that I have can actually be applied in a meaningful way to a specific person, and move it towards something greater than either of us could probably materialize on our own.
what about friendships? Like how do you go about creating deep relationships on that front?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tricky one. I think, in my own personal life, friendships have changed and shifted so often. in different ways because of different life changes or different community changes or circumstance changes or whatever. But when I think about a lot of my clients that I'm working with that maybe are struggling with different degrees of difficulty in the social realm, one of the things that seems to be a constant battle is trying to learn, figure out, navigate whatever, how to show up in those spaces and how much of yourself to show up with. And so when it comes to relationships, I think the more of yourself that you can bring forward into a situation, the better. But that also means that you, again, kind of have to, if we rewind a little bit, you have to really know who you are. Otherwise, you're just showing up semi impulsively, and that may or may not go in the way that you want it to. And so when it comes to friendships and relationships, really knowing how you're wired, knowing why certain things matter to you and why others don't, knowing what it means to fully express and lead with courage in regards to the conversations you have, the ways you treat people, the ways you show up in different social settings, all that's really powerful stuff to explore. But what I would hope is that if we all can choose authenticity as a primary way of engaging the world and curiosity as a primary way of engaging with the world and other people, then that combination of curiosity and authenticity can really fuel relationships that have a backbone to them.
Right. It's like you don't have to even plan it out. You just show up this way, interface with curiosity, things
Mhm.
will work their way out. Yeah, that I
Yeah,
think that's very true.
yeah, and when I think about that, it's like I don't know how that will go, right? I don't know if it will quote unquote work out, but I know that the connections you make from that place will be more significant for you. You know, you may not make 50 friends at the whatever social gathering, but you might meet one or two people that actually you feel a significant connection to, that actually you feel like hit a few things for you in regards to what it feels like to, make relationships that seem of value and meaning to you.
Yeah. Okay. So you touched on somatics earlier. I think that's a big thing a lot of people deal with, and that's kind of an unknown also for a lot of people is just living outside of your body and not being tapped in. So
Mhm.
how do you help people work with that? Or how would you if someone came to you with that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is maybe two pieces of this. There's a very like visceral biological part of it, and then there's a sort of like spiritual, soulful part of it. And I think one of the big things that has to happen is we have to even just learn how our bodies are affected by the lives that we have or have had in the first place. I think it's so easy in our world and culture just to kind of wake up, do a bunch of things that you know you're supposed to or have to do, and then end the day and not have really paid much attention to what your physiological and somatic experience of that life, what it has been. And so at the onset of a lot of these processes, it's really just kind of learning how to make sense of what your body's trying to tell you. There's a there's a funny phrase that's sometimes used in therapeutic type communities where they say the issues are in the tissues. And it's a really funny but potent kind of statement to recognize that so much of what we carry, of what we hope for, of what we struggle with is very much located in this physical reality that we are. And so learning to attune to your body, learning to care for it, learning how to push it and grow it, learning how to be able to create a continuous dialogue with your body is probably one of the most crucial factors at the onset of engaging in some sort of somatic process. And then the other half, that kind of like spiritual soulful piece, is to recognize that your body is not just a meat suit that you're moving through the world in, but is a potent place of integration and interfacing between you and the world, you and other people, you and other things, you and other energies. And your body is the way in which you even know that you are a person in some regard. And so, on that like deeper level, there are aspects of being that we all have in this kind of psychosomatic dynamic that is who we are that need our attention. And one of those things, as an example, is intuition. Um, it is a very body knowledge, somatic wisdom, spiritual insight kind of experience that when you own it, when you invest in it, when you take it seriously, when you create, again, like a dialogue with it, that it actually can be a powerful tool for you to move through the world and help you feel into and make decisions about certain things, and so many other realities. But that is again one of the huge pieces of why a somatic sort of orientation or a somatic sort of therapeutic processes is so powerful because again we rarely check in with our bodies unless we're using it for some reason or unless it's not cooperating with us in the ways that we want it to. Maybe you pay attention to your body when you do yoga or you do CrossFit because you're trying to accomplish something through your physical system. Or maybe you don't, but then you do pay attention when you finally do get an injury or you get sick or you have some disease that kicks in or you're in so much pain that you can't sleep and you're not quite sure why. Sometimes these pressure cooker situations orient out of a place because we have ignored our bodies for so long and haven't considered them as a crucial piece of our reality and who we are that needs to be front and center in how we show up daily.
What does your typical day look like? Do you have any like habits or routines that you think particularly, increase your quality of life?
Yeah, so my life at the current time has a sort of baseline that I feel okay about, but I'm not stoked about it. And one of the reasons why that is because post COVID, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which came out of nowhere. So I got the virus, and about 6 months later, my immune system had been so compromised that my pancreas failed, and therefore I was in a medical emergency and require now insulin to manage my livelihood. Prior to this diagnosis, which was just under 2 years ago, I felt really good about where I was at with my body and other things because I had put all this work and effort into developing certain practices and exercises and schedules that allowed me to really be in my body in ways that felt good. I've had this disease, this autoimmune condition now for about a year and a half, which has been a world turning, flipping experience for me. But slowly but surely over time, I'm continuing to learn how my body works, how the technology works, and therefore cultivating some of the practices and things that I do value and getting them back into my life in ways that used to be really fulfilling. And so there's a huge learning process that I've been going through over the past year and a half that has challenged some of my daily patterns. But to maybe speak to that briefly, you know, I I, I desire to be physically active and to engage my body in healthy and challenging ways. I desire to be mindfully attuned to the things that are going on in my life. And same thing in healthy and challenging ways. I commit to pushing myself in different ways around what I'm learning, what I'm doing, how I'm showing up in the world, and so on and so forth. And so, a typical day looks like waking up, we have three different spaniels as puppies. So we have three dogs that I take out. In the morning, we do, depending on where my body's at that day, we take either a really long walk and get to really enjoy the outdoors as much as possible, or we take a shorter one so that I can do things I need to do to take care of myself. So that's pretty much the beginning of every day, and the end of every day is take the dogs out, do the thing. And oftentimes on those walks, if my body's in a good place, I'll use those times as contemplative moments to think about something, to consider something, to chew on an idea or reflect on something that I'm working on in myself. And then, depending on my work schedule, there's different degrees of mindfulness and meditation that I engage with, different degrees of exercise and fitness that I engage with, yoga practices. I often will cycle through a lot of different books. So I'm already always reading something, and oftentimes I'm reading too many things at the same time. But it's kind of nice too because it's like I can see right in front of me that on my little side table there's two books that I've been bouncing back and forth, and then on this side table beside me there's two other books I've been bouncing back and forth. I'm like, oh yeah, these are great. So I'm always learning. That's kind of a habit. I'm always exploring. That's a habit. And then I'm conscious of what I'm putting in my body, how I'm exerting myself. things like that. But as a whole, like I mentioned, this autoimmune condition and this post-COVID diagnosis like has thrown things in a loop, and it's made certain things like I used to do a lot of CrossFit and things like that, and that's been almost impossible to do because of how it affects your body. And I just haven't learned quite yet what that means for me, even though I am learning slowly.
How do you think you're going to look back on this period of your life?
Yeah. So when I think about the past, I'll say 2 years of life, one of the first things that comes to mind is it has been full of so many intense stressors. Some of the things that my wife and I have had to face over the past 2 years, especially around my physical health and what that has done to my ability to, move through the world has really been hard. And so when I look at this season, I'm just, still kind of like, what in the world has happened and what in the world is going on? But I think one of the things I'll also notice is that something shifted for me that allowed me to have a deeper willingness and openness to what this life could be and maybe even is on some level that I hadn't even considered before. And so I think when I look back on this season, I'll be like, man, that was really hard. And we made it. And let's not do that again. And at the same time, wow, what an interesting and crazy thing to go through, and what a powerful and potent time to really dig in deep with who we want to be, how we want to show up, what we want to prioritize, what really matters, and letting go of some of the things that have held us back. So I think I'll look back on this time with a bit of like yikes and a little bit of gratitude at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, health in general is like it's pretty cliched, but this idea of like you don't recognize how good health is until you're sick. That's so true. Like it's just so easy to take things for granted as soon as they're there.
Hmm.
I had that today. I always think about this like averted disasters, like when something could have gone really wrong and then it doesn't, you kind of just move on and forget about it. I had this happen like 3 years ago. I was in my car and I tried to open the car door, and it was while I was driving because I think I had like mouthwash in the car and I was trying to spit it out. And I opened the car door and it didn't open all the way and it like got stuck, like partially open, but it was latched. So I couldn't open it. And it ended up costing me like $1,000 just to fix that one little latch thing. And then today I'm getting out of my car and I let my dog out the back seat and I close the door, it locks, and it's in that same like partially open, partially closed. And I was like, oh shit, this is like I'm gonna have to go back and pay again and get it fixed. And then I unlock it and it just opens. So no problem. And that was one of those like I could just move on from that, or I could like have a moment of gratitude to be like, things are a lot better than that would have been a huge pain in the ass. And I'm really glad
Yeah.
that didn't happen. I think, yeah, I've been trying to do that more, recognizing things that could go wrong that don't go wrong. And I think
Hmm.
health is one of those when you are healthy to be like, this is going really well.
Yeah. And one of the things that's come forward for me as a result of this is I used to function and operate in different communities pretty readily and pretty easily because I didn't have to think about all the 50 things that I now have to think about, and my body was different. And I've always been a fairly compassionate and mindful person around what certain things mean and the impact they have on others and dot, 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 dot. But having these issues kind of immediately excluded me from all of those communities where I used to show up so freely. And it added a level of complication, difficulty, and stress that has not allowed me to be in those communities anymore. And as a result, it's really brought to mind not only a gratitude for like the health I do have and the health I used to have and all these things, but also a consciousness around like there's so many things that people struggle with that are seen and unseen. And there are so many things in our current ways of showing up in the world, in our communities, in our social systems, in our hobbies, that really are unconsciously excluding or exclusatory or whatever the word might be. And we don't ever think about it. We don't ever consider that, like, oh, for example, I used to work out with a lot of people that were like insta famous for being fitness whatevers. I would just show up and have fun and do the thing. I never during that time of my life thought that there might be someone else who wanted to join, but had so many things they needed as accommodations and supports to make sure they felt safe and okay in order to engage those things that would need to be considered. And I think, especially since I work so much in, the mental health space, chronic illness sometimes filters into that and other things. And because I've been in the wellness and fitness world a significant amount, that sometimes filters in more of just like a checklist to make sure someone's not going to like die on you when you're doing something. But I never considered it through the lens of like, oh, there's a lot of people out there with chronic illness that they didn't ask for, that came from nowhere, that impact their ability to show up in the world in ways that they might want to. And a lot of these places where I used to show up never ask those questions, and they never follow up on anything. They're never curious about like, hey, can we include you in this because we value you as a person and we want to make sure that you're safe and healthy and you feel good about how far you can go and what you can do while we do this. So much of it, if I say from the outside in a judgmental way looking in, is more of like, can you run as fast as me? Can you lift as much as me? Can you be as positive as me? And if you can't, well, maybe we really don't want to work out with you because that's going to hold me back or that's going to slow me down. And I think, especially for men, what I've seen is that there's such an anxiety to being held back or slowed down or whatever it might be from our goals or what we want to achieve. The unconsciousness of that is actually really hurtful because it doesn't ask questions about what it means to truly be human. It asks questions about what you want and how you want to be seen, but it's not asking questions about like, how can I show up in the world in a different way that actually allows me to accomplish my goals and be the fitnessy, whatever kind of person I want to be, but also so that like other people who might feel or have complications around something like this, whether it be this thing, that thing, or another, it doesn't have to just be fitness, actually feel like they're not just on an island themselves managing something stressful and they have to really bargain around what they're going to do or not going to do. Dealing with this issue for me has really shown me some things that I can't unsee. And it's also brought up some questions for me around like, well, how do we even do that? Because so many of the things in our culture that we idolize or we aspire to are very niche things that are operated by people who have a unique ability or have had a unique gifting or support into being able to do those things. The fact that you might want to make a lot of money, have you considered the fact that there are X, Y, and Z that contribute to X to Y said person is now seen as an authority on that? You know, can you recognize that this person who's this like fitnessy whatever or guru, like, can you consider that, well, that person's able to do that because of this, and this? We just, as people, we're so focused on the image of something and how we want or don't want that thing. And we don't ever stop to really slow down and ask the questions of like, well, what does that mean for me? And what might that mean for other people? And if that makes any sense at all, I think that's something that has really become a lot more profound in my mindset and in my own internal compass with dealing with this issue. It was there before, but not nowhere near to the degree that it is now.
Right. Expanding. Yeah. I mean, so many of us live in like a tunnel, which is just our own experience. And you go through your
Mm-hmm.
day, you have your struggles. And yeah, it's sometimes you have to go through something to actually expand that and be like, oh, like other people were going through what I'm going through now back then.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are times where I'll hear about someone will be like, oh yeah, like that person struggles with anxiety. And then I'm just like, oh, I had no idea. And now that's like a whole new thing to open up of like they're going through this whole experience on their own that I had no idea about.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sometimes waking up to that is interesting. I'm curious what do you do with that now that you have this kind of greater awareness of all the things that go into, what people project themselves as. What do you do with that now?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one level, I try just to continue to invest in myself in a way that enables me to be more conscious and more aware and more attuned to the things moving around me and the people in my world that may or may not feel able to express certain things. And then it also promotes something in me that wants to see if there's a way to figure something out and provide a new option. I don't know if that answers the question, but one of the things it's also done is made me a little less convinced that some of the things that are touted as like achievable goals or worthwhile ways of being, it's maybe be like, yeah, I don't actually know if that's actually all that great. It looks great. It sounds great, but sounds great and looks great to who? And I think for so many people, that question of like, if you were to ask yourself that of like, why do you feel so drawn to this? Or why do you feel like you need to work so hard for this? Or why do you, want to spend all your money and time trying to be like this person? And I think so much of it comes from an egoic place, meaning that I think I am and should be a certain way, and therefore I think the world needs to be a certain kind of way, and therefore I need to make it that way. And it's like, well, maybe not. Ego might say, hey, I need to be like the next X, Y, and Z person, because then that means that I'll be acknowledged, I'll be recognized, I'll have status, I'll be seen as good or competent or whatever it might be. Back to those ideas of those old wounds, I might be actually seen as enough now, finally. And instead being able to say, like, well, you know what? Like, what if that's not it? What if being the next CrossFit all-star or the next yoga teacher, superstar, or the next whatever, what if that's really not it? And then what if we as people gave more permission to each other to let go of these exceptional images that we end up driving our lives towards so much? And what if we didn't have to be so exceptional all the time in order to be worthy or to be important or to be valued?
What does your dream life look like?
My dream life? It's kind of all over the place. I have maybe three different categories that I place thing into that. And one would be like there's nights where I don't really dream and I don't really remember it. The other would be the kind of middle of the road where I have some dreams. They might be a bit disheveled and hard to track, but there seems to be pieces in each of them that are worth sitting with and creating time to acknowledge and lean into. And then the third category would be there's the overt, dreams where um, you have a dream that's very robust and has a lot going on and is very palpable and visceral and really leaves you with like, whoa, this happened and this and this and this and this. And so I try to take my dreams seriously. I come from the school of thought that originated from Carl Jung and what's known as depth psychology. And dream work in that world is seen as a very, very powerful tool to engage. And so, when I do have the overt dreams, I definitely make sure I write them down, contemplate them, especially if I'm walking the dogs, like I mentioned, as one of my kind of habits. Like, that's a really great time to be like, huh, I wonder what the dream was trying to tell me. I wonder how my soul, how my psyche, how my mind was, trying to come through in a different way through the dream, through the images, through the sensations, to help me see something that I need to see that I can't see in my waking experience. So dream work, for me is something that I take seriously. I definitely want to invest more in because I think there's a lot of power there that I haven't quite tapped into. But yeah, I have those overt dreams. I have some of the like middle of the way that are important but hard to track, and then the other where there's not much going on.
This is funny. I think I've asked every single guest this question, and what
Mm-hmm.
I mean by it is your dream life, like your
Mm-hmm.
ideal life that you
Oh
dream
yeah,
of.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I've never heard this, and I love this, like your dream life. What's your dream life? Like your life in dream. So
Oh yeah.
that's so interesting.
Well, I think that's a funny thing because I come from
Yeah,
the background I come from. Your dream life is
right.
one of the most untapped resources of psychological and physiological energy that we have. And so there is a lot of like, oh, yeah, my dream life is important because the life that is there in my dreams, in the dream world, in the unconscious, is far greater and more vast than I ever could imagine. And there's so much happening there that I am completely an observer to. So it's really, interesting and powerful to lean into that. If I shift gears and say, oh, what would my dream life look like? I think I have parts of it in the way that I show up in the world now. I if I project, we'll say 10 years down the road, I would want to be doing similar things to what I'm doing now. I would just want them maybe to be more stable, or want them to have progressed in a certain kind of way. So if I think about, how I live life now, I love my wife and our marriage is profoundly good. And I would want to just keep making that as best it could be, keep refining myself as a husband, keep leaning into my edges and allowing there to be space for her to confront me and bring up things in a way that help nurture our connection, so that the things that we do and the life that we live continues just to thrive in a really open and fluid and curious way. And then when I think about my professional world, I can see myself being a therapist for the rest of my life in some capacity. And I have also expended a ton of energy and resources over the past 15 years to be the therapist I am now. And I would like to be able to uh, watch my career be less of a grind around supporting financial necessity and more about diving deeper into some of these things that I've mentioned today and some of the other things that I churn in the back of my mind and I play around with certain clients, uh, to dive into the realm of psyche in a more nuanced way. And then with yoga, like I would love to keep doing what I'm doing, to teach more consistently, to write more frequently, to engage with different people in the yoga world in more collaborative and dynamic ways so that, the people that may or may not interface with us really walk away feeling different and feeling empowered. And then in the music world that I operate in, yeah, I would want that to take a higher place of prominence in my life. Right now, it's like if I were to pie chart out my life, work with therapy and coaching takes up probably, you know, 50 to 80% of my time. Then the yoga stuff takes up probably about 10. And then the music stuff probably takes up about, 10 to 20. Now I need to create another pie chart for relationships and all that stuff because that's different. But, I would love for those things to be a little bit more equal, like 30% coaching therapy, 30% music. And I'm a luthier, which is a fancy way of saying a guitar builder or an instrument repair and building person. And then yoga another 30 plus percent, so that each thing has a nice flow and I'm able to engage them more readily. So I'd love to keep expanding on what it is and have it become more solid and feel more energizing. And then, you know, if I pull up some fun images, I think it would be cool, dream scenario to like have multiple houses in really amazing places. I could live here for a part of the year, live here for part of the year, live here.
All right, Mikey. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate this, and I think it was a interesting and telling conversation. Yeah,
Yeah.
very happy with it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking the questions and for holding the space. And I'm grateful to be able to run my mouth a little bit.
Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so I have two different websites. One is mikeybrackett.com, which is the site I use for a lot of my coaching stuff. I built a program years ago that I run on an infrequent basis that's all about healing some of those core wounds that we talked about earlier. It's called Healing the Father Wound. I have my therapy website, which is mikeybtherapy.com, which is where you can just kind of get all the basic information from me about therapeutic services. I work primarily virtual and online, so can kind of host therapy from anywhere. And then my Instagram, which is something I invest in sometimes and then other times completely forget about. It's just my name, Mikey.Brackett. And you can find me there. I'm pretty responsive to messages and things there. People have questions or are curious about things. And then, yeah, we're located in Denver, Colorado. We also spend a lot of time near Asheville, North Carolina. That's where my grandmother's home is. And so, yeah, kind of those places. So if you see me in one of those cities or towns, say hi.
All right. Bye, everybody.